All right, I'm Steve Wood, recovered alcoholic.
Yep, and my name is Howard Eber. I am a recovered alcoholic as well. What we're going to do tonight, Steve and I were talking earlier today, and we're on page 17. There is a solution. And Steve talked about how he comes at this page, and it struck me that we are coming at the same page and extracting two different points of view, not opposing points of view. It's just that we extract some things differently. So what we decided to do is I'm going to go through page 17, and then Steve's going to go through it. And then we'll go through the rest 18, one paragraph at a time, and so on. But just to keep the flow of what we were talking about this afternoon, and see if you don't find the same thing, that we're coming at the same material and extracting some different points. So let's start. There is a solution. That is a promise, incidentally, and it is a solution. I've got that A circled because there aren't many. It's not there are many, there are a lot. There is a solution. And we of Alcoholics Anonymous, and let's get that clear, the we is not the 36 people here today. The we was defined on the first page. We are 100 men and women who have recovered. So anytime we see that terminology, we or us in this book, they're talking about that first 100 or 80 or 40 or however many there were actually in the beginning. That's what they're referring to. If you want to be considered part of that we, do the work, and you might consider yourself as part of that family. But when they say we in this book, they're talking about the first 100. So he's saying we, those first 100 of Alcoholics Anonymous, know thousands, and you may want to change that to millions, because that's where we are today, of men and women who were once just as hopeless as Bill. And when I go through this with a sponsee, I ask them to write out as a question, was I as hopeless as Bill? Was I? Nearly all have recovered. Interesting point. In the original manuscript, if you have the book that started it all, or you have any copies of the original lithograph, a mimeograph, that sentence read differently. That sentence in the original manuscript said, all have recovered. They snuck in that word nearly, and it really changes it a bit. But again, I think Bill did that because he didn't want to come off as the Oxford groups who claimed they're absolutes. And he didn't want to copy that. He didn't want to be thought of as the same way. So he wasn't guaranteeing that. So nearly all have recovered. And there's another reference to recovered. There's quite a few we've come across. I like to highlight them so they stand out. They have solved the drink problem, and there's another promise. There's two promises, and we're only in the first paragraph here. Um, we are average people. I've crossed out Americans because it's not that way anymore. Look around the room. We are average people. I'm going to suggest something that I'm going to mention some words here, and I'm going to ask that you underline them. And then I'll tell you when we get to the end of the paragraph why I did that. If you go down about 4 or 5 lines in this paragraph that begins with, we are average Americans, he's going to see a sentence that says, we're people who normally would not mix. There exists among us a fellowship. Please underline fellowship. Please underline friendliness. Please underline understanding. Please underline indescribably wonderful. Then if you would, please go down 2 lines and let's underline camaraderie, joyousness, and democracy. So we've got quite a few words here that Bill is telling us something is indescribably delicious, like almond joys. It's indescribably wonderful. But now let me read it. We'll put it in perspective. We're average people, all sections of this world. I changed country to world for obvious reasons, and many of its occupations are represented, as well as many political, economic, social, and religious backgrounds. And I've highlighted this next sentence. We are people who normally would not mix. Now, I believe Bill, when he wrote that, was talking about what he just mentioned, that we come from different political, different economic, different social, different religious backgrounds. So we would never wind up in the same room together. Now, I take that a little differently. I could see the point he's trying to make. But when he says we're people who would not mix, I take that personally because that describes my character. I'm not a person who's comfortable in a room with a lot of people. I'd rather sit with the twos and the fews or the ones and the twos. And I have no problem getting up in front of a room and speaking to 200 people. That's easy. But you put me down on that dining room floor with those 200 people, and I'm like Ralph Cramden. I don't know what to say. I go totally inside still to this day. And I recognize I got high for a lot of years trying to make myself into something that I wasn't, which is somebody who was comfortable in every social situation. I never was. And I so at this point understand there are a lot that I never will be. I just recognize, like John Wayne said, you've got to recognize your limitations. And that's one of mine. I'm a person who ordinarily would not mix. And I'm sure there are other people in this room today who feel the same way, right? That we just don't mix well with other people and we drank to try and make us comfortable. Okay, continue. But there exists among us a fellowship, a friendliness, and an understanding which is indescribably wonderful. I think we all agree. It just means we all belong. We come in here, and Bill is now starting to describe the spirit of the fellowship. The spirit of the fellowship that's created by those of us who are part of this fellowship of the Spirit, who create a certain atmosphere in meetings. And we surround the newcomer when they come in, and we give them our hope, our experience. They hopefully begin to see, believe, think that maybe they could do that too. So they pick up the set of tools we lay at their feet, that toolbox with 12 steps in it. And they work those 12 steps and they have a spiritual awakening. And then they join the fellowship of the Spirit. And now it's their job to create the spirit of the fellowship for the newcomer. So when the newcomer comes in, he finds that friendliness, that understanding, that indescribably wonderful feeling. And in a few lines, we got camaraderie, joyousness, democracy. Those are all words used to describe the spirit of the fellowship that is created by the fellowship of the Spirit. Continuing, we are like passengers of a great liner the moment after rescue from shipwreck when, and here's three more words, camaraderie, joyousness, democracy, pervade the vessel from steerage to captain's table. I'm sure most of us here have seen the movie Titanic. Rob, if you want to put up that luxury liner cross section for a moment. You know, back in when this book was written, people didn't fly back and forth across the ocean. They took luxury liners, ocean liners, like the Titanic, among others. And I'm going to wait till you put that up. This gives you an idea of what we're talking about, how they were separated by classes. the lowest class was down in the bottom in the steerage, and then there was third and second and first class standard, and then first class luxury. And when they were on the ship, they were pretty much kept in those areas. But when the ship went down, when the Titanic went down, nobody asked what class you're in. They just said, get into the lifeboats. When those people were rescued by the Carpathia, you could take that down, Rob. When the Carpathia rescued the people from the Titanic, the first thing they did on the deck of the Carpathia, because they had a clipboard with a listing of names, is they sent everybody back into the classes that they were originally they bought their tickets for. So once they came out of the great tragedy of the boat sinking, they went their own separate ways. But Bill is saying here that unlike say the Titanic, when we go down, when we suffer our common peril, our joy and escape from disaster does not subside as we go our individual ways. And I've highlighted that. And I've highlighted the rest of this paragraph too. The feeling of having shared in a common peril, please underline common peril, is one element. You may want to underline that one. In the powerful cement which binds us, and here's another promise that I've highlighted and underlined, but that in itself would never have held us together as we're now joined. So here's the point I'm trying to make. And in the beginning, I told you all of the terms that Bill is saying about the fellowship. The fellowship is this: it's wonderful, it's friendly, it's indescribable, it's camaraderie, it's joyousness, it's all of those things. But it's not enough. It's not enough. Fellowship is not enough.
Can I say something, Howard?
Yeah.
So, I'm gonna go back a little bit. I mean, pretty much the same aspect of all this, but, you know, where it says, you know, the series of captains said, well, just like Howard said, you know, the boat is sinking, we're gonna join together, but, you know, we do not subside as we go our individual ways. You know, after we reach the shore, you know, this is the common problem of the boat, you know, sinking, good or bad, you know, poor or rich, you're going down, you know, you're going down. And, you know, and the powerful cement that binds us. I mean, you look around the room here, we have the exact same common danger, this allergy obsession, common parallel that brings us together. And we call it, what do we call it? I call it fellowship. And what they're saying here is that fellowship, it's a warning, it's one element of the cement, just one. It secures us, fastens us together. But also, you know, it creates this emotional, you know, aspect. And, you know, and like the warning Howard just said, you know, as we are now joined, you know, that the warning is that, like Howard says, our fellowship is one element, one little piece. Just like sobriety is just a byproduct of spirituality, which holds us together. You know, what he's also saying here is fellowship is one, is alone without the steps will not make you recover from this illness. And how many relapse over and over again and never see this point? He's making, it runs deep. How often do you hear people say, I relapsed because I didn't do the steps? You know, they say, I relapsed because I wasn't going to enough meetings. He's saying here, you know, we cannot go to meetings and not do the steps. Yeah. Go ahead, Howard.
Yeah. Rob, can I get the number 13, the common solution, common peril? As Rob just started to point out. Let me get this graphic up. I think it's the first one on the list, the orange one. There we go. If you could just blow that up a bit. Okay. On the left, the fellowship is described in these terms: camaraderie, democracy, informality. And I've taken some other terms that he uses later in the book: stimulating an electric atmosphere, their haven at last, informality. It's indescribably wonderful. But all of those things, as Steve mentioned, are only one element in the cement that binds us together. In the middle is that, I'm sure most of you are old enough to remember, epoxy. Today, when you want to glue something together, crazy glue or gorilla glue will do it. It's one chemical. Back in before those days, they had epoxy, which were two chemicals. They were in these syringes that were pushed out in equal amounts, and the two equal amounts was what bound the thing together. Whatever you were trying to bind, those two chemicals were what did the binding. And in the case of Alcoholics Anonymous, we have shared a common peril, which is the hopeless state of mind and body that is active alcoholism. And that common peril brought us together in this fellowship. But that fellowship alone, all of those things on the left-hand side, is great, but it's insufficient. It is an inadequate, insufficient higher power, because we are beyond human aid. So the powerful cement which binds us together is mentioned in the very next paragraph. Please leave this up for a second, Rob. The next paragraph says the tremendous fact for every, and let me read that last line in the previous one, but that in itself would never have held us together as we're now joined. It's a warning. It's a warning of fellowship oversteps. And the next sentence says the tremendous fact for every one of us is we've discovered a common solution. And that's what the bottom part of this is. The common solution is the way out on which we can absolutely agree and on which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. You could take that down, Rob. Thank you. The common solution, the way out that we can absolutely agree on, and we join in brotherly and harmonious action, which means we do it together, not one by themselves. We do it together in brotherly and harmonious action. And I want to point something else out to you before I turn it over to Steve. This paragraph begins with a fact. It says the tremendous fact for every one of us is we've discovered a common solution. You may want to keep that in mind. And then holding this page where it is, turn to page 25, if you will, because Bill's going to give us some other facts. The first fact is a tremendous fact. And what is the tremendous fact? Is we have discovered a common solution. Turn to page 25, middle of the page. Then he gives us a great fact. The great fact. We had a tremendous fact. Now we got a great fact. What is the great fact? That we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences which have revolutionized our whole attitude towards life, towards our fellows, towards God's universe. And now he gives us another one, a central fact. So we have a tremendous fact, the common solution. We have a great fact as we have had these spiritual experiences. And here's the central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. And if you want to read it the other way, has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. It means the same thing to me. Lives, lives, either way. He's commenced to accomplish those things which we could never do by ourselves. So we're being introduced to a whole set of facts here. We got 3 facts right away. And I'm going to finish up on 17, where Bill says another promise. The paragraph, the page ends with the promise. This is the great news that the book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism, not the news of the fellowship. The news, the message that this book carries is the program of action. There have been other fellowships in history. They all failed. They didn't have the program of action that we have. And I'll turn it back to you, Steve.
Yeah, I want to comment on the page 25 too. It says, because these guys are saying the central fact of their life. When I say central, I mean the middle of a circle, right? The middle of the nucleus was the absolute certainty that God is into our heart. Absolute certainty. When you're certain about something, what does that mean? It means you know it, right? So that's that. I'm just giving the mindset, and I kind of want to back up a little bit to a little bit, since, in 1964 was the birth of the speaker discussion meeting. We were kind of talking about that before the meeting started. And it began to present meetings drastically different. You know, the book was not represented, it turned into more like group therapy. And when this book was written, people were not allowed, a lot of them, to speak their minds at meetings and talk about their lawnmower breaking down or something. A success rate was in the 90s or more, right? And the fellowship was not designed as a place where we dump our, tell, war stories. It was a place to tell how it works, right? And discussing and sharing that we have a common, problem, will not hold us together. We could sit there and, and talk about that all night long. But that's what people do at meetings today, and it's basic cognitive group therapy. He's telling us very nicely that that's how it doesn't work. So the big question, Howard mentioned tremendous fact, and that it's something that proven to be true. It needs proof, so it must have results, and a fact cannot be disputed. That's the main thing with it. And you can't argue facts, but people argue facts all the time, right? And the tremendous describes something that is a very spiritual word to me is remarkable, right? So he's putting this as great importance. And the fact that every one of us, I mean, he's saying every single one of these first 100 discovered a common solution. So I'm going to show you guys something up here of this is my perspective of how I look at the common solution and what that means. And I mean, Howard mentioned at the beginning, this is one of the only books as a promise. I mean, chapters, you know, and so I'm going to share the screen and give me 1 second. I gotta do something real quick. Here we go. And you're gonna wonder is why are we at math school all of a sudden? So this is the best, simplest way. I heard a guy years ago explain this. Because the problem is we have many solutions. There's one guy who always said the solution was kindness, and say it's this and that, and some will say it's God, which is fine. But this implies there's a solution. The reason why, there's so many solutions, it's nice to know. So I'm going to do a simple equation. So you got 5 times 5 is 25. What's the solution? Now, I do this on a whiteboard at the books that I do on the outside. Everyone yells out 25. And they go, well, no, that would be the answer, right? And then I always say, so then it must be 5 times 5. Nope, that's the problem, right? That's the problem. Solution to get me to the answer is multiplication, right? So multiplication is a method used to bring me to an answer. That's a chemist way of looking at it. So a solution is a method used to bring you to an answer so you can solve your problem. So what is the solution, to addiction? What is the method used to solve the problem of alcohol and addiction? Because we know our problem is, physical allergy, mental obsession, right? And so what is the solution? Now this is, top secret information. Not everybody knows this stuff. right? The solution is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And eventually I get to 10, I continue 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And how do I, I can keep doing those steps, but how am I really going to understand it? I'm going to give the solution to someone else. I won't fully understand this until that. But that's a method to bring you to the answer to overcome alcohol. And some people might say, what's the answer? It's whatever you find. Could be God, it could be freedom, it could be whatever. So we take that problem and we apply the solution and we get the answer. And that's a beautiful place to be. Again, the solution is a method to bring me to the answer. And the reason I say it's top secret and joke like that is not a lot of people in the fellowship. If I did that in a meeting, I would be chased up the countryside with pitchforks, because the solutions are the meetings, you know. But then, the thing about it is, back to where we're at, but the tremendous fact that we discovered a common solution, 4 through 9, this group right here is bound together by the common solution. Someone said before, you don't hear this stuff like you hear at normal meetings. Ask yourself right now, is the fellowship today, is that what you see? Do you hear people talking about the common solution or the common problem? And people are stuck on the common problem that brought them here in the first place, and we're trying to get away from that. If you go to lose weight meetings, whatever, OA or something like that, do they talk about the crap they ate in the past? No, they talk about the food that they must eat today, and I mean, and also it says we have a way out which we completely, absolutely agree upon. Again, is the fellowship, is that what we see today? I mean, how many different ways are promoted? This is a meeting, there's the meeting maker's way and the more meetings way and the half measures way and don't drink before meeting, put the plug in, fake it till you make it, doing the steps your own way, pacing yourself, there are all sorts of different messages, and that's fine. That's one of the unique things about it. Lots of time, but the main thing is the steps are, they're the last thing, almost like at the bottom of the list, like in what's that book, Living Silver? Is that what you said, Howard? Yeah, they put it at the last thing. And, the one who's recovered, or just, did their fifth step, they sit around the room and they go, what's going on here? So we celebrate, we give out chips, we celebrate time away from drink. We don't celebrate, hey, John just did his fifth step. I mean, how many ways is a newcomer exposed to? And that's the main thing what this page is telling us. Does that, that doesn't sound like a common solution. I mean, in The Wizard of Oz, how many yellow brick roads are there? And did they absolutely agree upon, when someone said, you follow this road, you get there. But it's just, we have a way out with, so, that's the great news this book carries. And that's a great fact. That's what, this is what started to get me interested in here, going to this with my sponsor the first time. We can join Brotherly Harmonious Action. There's only, one way in this book, right? And that's the great news. There isn't all these different ways. And remember, this is, after the book came out, there was two Alcoholics Anonymouses, the fellowship and the book, and they strongly mirrored each other 100%. And does that still happen today? The fellowships, think of the two fellowships that exist, the fellowship of the meetings and the fellowship of the spirit. I tried the fellowship of the meetings for a long time without even knowing what the fellowship of the spirit existed. And of course, we know which one's the more powerful of the two. Not knocking meetings. I love meetings, go to meetings all the time. But in the fellowship of the spirit, we have 5 things. We have a common problem. We have a common solution. We have a way out which we can agree upon. We can join Brotherly Harmonious Action, and we are recovered, right? And the fellowship of the meetings, we only have one thing, the common problem. Maybe some Brotherly Harmonious Action, but not the action part as much as I'd like to see. So, we must go to meetings and work the steps. And, the main thing is the meetings won't change you. So there's division going on. I like to use this analogy. It's a really deep analogy because Howard mentioned earlier there's a meeting that's what 500 people there or something like that.
Mhm.
And the thing is, let's say there's two convention halls. This is not speaking from using a perspective. Two convention halls, two very large rooms. Room one says lectures all day on God's will, sold out, fill the capacity, staying room only. Room two says God's will, all seats available. And what I'm saying is people would, the point, people would love to hear to listen about God's will, but when it comes down to taking the appropriate action to change their lives in God's will, people would rather just hear a lecture. People would rather know about God, than know God. And that's the thing that shocked me when I did these. Wait, you can know God, and that's because that's what spiritual experience is. Anything you know in life is from something you experience. Anything you haven't experienced is a theory. And how many theories do people have in the program? You know, and I mean, when I did a book study up the street, there would be 200 people at that meeting. It was a simple speaker meeting, and up the street would be my meeting, and it was a book study, and we had 35 people there. Says a lot, not that I'm special or anything like that, you know, but people are content with getting their fill, of a certain thing. And the same thing with AAs, that's what happens, and many of those who attend, you know, this study have taken the appropriate action to experience God through the steps, and they want to know more, because when you do the steps, you're always a sponge to this day. I mean, if Howard and I weren't doing the steps, we would be out at the beach somewhere. We could, we figured it all out. We did step once, but the more we do this, that's the beauty of this. And that's what's going on in recovery. There are those doing the work and those who just know about it or heard about it. Oh yeah, I've heard about these steps. I mean, I used to wonder what that blue book was that sat up front. You know, I mean, how many people die because they just didn't know about this? I said a friend died two of them died yesterday. But so many enter the fellowship and are confused because they think solution is the meetings. That's what I did. You know, that's what I did. And now, so we're going to move on from this. We're going to start looking into the ugliness of the illness. Some, simply call this stuff untreated alcoholism. It's also known as spiritual sickness, spiritual malady, unmanageability. Remember, unmanageability comes from many different directions. There's consequences, and then there's the insanity of the first drink, and then there's the spiritual sick stuff. So let's look at this. I'll start reading this one. An illness of this sort, and we have come to believe it as an illness, involves those about us in no way other human sickness can. If a person has cancer, all feel sorry for him and no one is hurt. So do people walk up to someone with, cancer and say, just quit this cancer stuff? No. Or say, I'll never talk to you again. Or you're making a big deal out of this. Or you could stop this cancer if you wanted. You don't hear that stuff. No, what are we? We're sympathetic and sad for them because we look at it as a deadly disease, and we have compassion. That's what compassion is. As alcoholics, we feel the same way, because we have empathy, right? Non-alcoholics will never understand why we drink. Even some people at the meetings are that, and they don't understand what we're talking about because they can understand, maybe I was at a meeting the other day and the guy stopped for his kids or another guy for his health. One guy with one meeting the other day was there because he got the AA because his boat sunk. Well, that wasn't my story, I was the boat that sunk. But you know, Howard, do you want to comment on that first little tidbit there?
Well, for what it's worth, that's the first mention of this being an illness, that it's, not a moral dilemma. This is an illness, and uh, there's nothing else I can add to that. That's, what I want to add is to stuff later. But incidentally, when Steve mentioned before about the Living Sober book, what he was talking about was the fact that in Living Sober, there are 31 chapters. They call them tips on living sober, 31 chapters. Number 30 of 31 is try the 12 steps. Trying the 12 steps. The 30th suggestion out of 31 is try the steps. And I think they should change that to, if you're still alive, try the 12 steps. But that's what Steve was talking about.
Right. Yeah, we said it's a better doorstop than the
Yeah.
it says, but not so with the alcoholic illness, for it goes annihilation of all things worthwhile in life. So annihilation means that means something that's like which destroys in large numbers. Like the LA fires, or that was annihilation of everything. And how many things did you annihilate in your life? What is valuable today in your life, and your kids, maybe your spouse, family, friends, the job you love. So it's common sense that it's, if anything, hurts or threaten those things, you know or we threaten them, we stop. But not so with the obsession. It doesn't care about any of that stuff. It doesn't care about your kids, your spouse, your family, your friends. It doesn't. Remember the movie The Terminator, where the guy Reese is explaining to the woman what the Terminator is. He says it cannot stop and will not stop until you are dead. And that's what the obsession will do. It will not stop, right? And it doesn't say, oh, you know what, we'll take a break on your kid here. We remind you today it's your kid. So don't, it doesn't work that way at all. One guy said to me years ago, I never forget this, it all fits into a bottle. Your kids, your house, or it all fits into a pipe. Your kids, your house, everything fits into it. You have any comments on that, Howard? You want to say?
I mean, yeah, because it made me think of what Ron White said about alcoholism, that alcoholism is like having sex with a bear. It ends when the bear wants to end it.
Right. 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 I remember that one.
Yeah, and your statement here, this is interesting, but not so with the alcoholic illness. For with it goes annihilation of all things worthwhile in life. I think if you turn that around, you could make a sentence that says, with the alcoholic illness goes annihilation of all things worthwhile. With the recovery, life becomes worthwhile. And as Steve was mentioning before, this is the only disease that, like, if someone's got a heart condition and they're taking medication and they're on the proper diet and they're doing all the right things that someone should do if they have a heart condition, and they have another heart attack, nobody says that son of a bitch went and had another heart attack. But they do that when we relapse.
Right. Look, it says next, says it engulfs. That means submerges all things, all whose lives touch the sufferer. All, all is, some people want to talk about the must in the big book. I say pay attention to the alls in this big book. All includes the loved ones. This is a pretty good indication right here that we caused harm. Our harm and resentments just go from one life to the next. And I love when newcomers, even some guys, old timers, will say, the only person I ever harmed is myself. And they say they don't have any resentments. Really? I mean, like, how? If you're a real alcoholic, this is why we do inventory. you know, we put people, because we put people through hell, you know. Or they say, the one thing I love, the only person I ever harmed is myself,
Yeah.
you know. So,
For what it's worth,
oh,
Steve,
go ahead.
39 dictionary, the word engulfs is defined as to immerse, to bury, or to swallow up.
Wow, that's a good one. It says it brings misunderstanding. You know, no one who people don't understand us, you know, why we do what we do. But the biggest misunderstanding is we can't comprehend, you know, that there's life beyond where we're at when we're in that bottle or in that pipe, whatever. You know, it's another reasons why so many don't do the steps, because they don't see that they're so locked in that, and they get here, you know, I'm always going to be sick, they say. I'm this way. And but now look at some of these words I'm going to break down as we go through them. We have fierce resentment. So
Mm.
fierce means what? Violent resentment. And what happens if we get violent with the resentment? It's a harm. You know, that's the reaction to the resentment. You know, going, you know, from selfish to self-seeking. Because this book, when we get this fourth step, we look more at it. But like selfish, considering mostly from our own wants and needs. Self-seeking is pursuing those wants and needs. That's the difference. And so one's a thought, one's an action. But you know, fierce resentment is another good indication we have harmed. And then it says, anything you want to say on that fierce resentment?
No, no, it's the rest of the things that just break your.
Okay. Financial insecurity. So here's the first mention of an instinct on the fourth step. We have material or pocketbook, financial insecurity. Let's talk, um, so it's one of the first mentions of the instincts, and one of the biggest driving forces of harms and resentment and fear is pocketbook, otherwise known that's material security. If my mind is wrapped up in material security, my mind is very discontent, short, angry. You're not gonna, restless, irritable, discontent. And another word for insecurity is anxiety, which
Mm.
is fear, right? So it's a good indication that we have some fears that we need to look at. So financial insecurity. And look at this one. Disgusted friends and employers. Interesting. I always thought it was interesting how they put them together, but disgust. So again, disgust means disapproval, strong disapproval. Did your friends disapprove of your actions leading to resentment? Before or after you harmed them? We harm lots of people. You know, we harm friends who were trying to help us. And how many second and third chances they give us? That's a good indication why we make amends right there. Same thing goes for employers as friends. That's if we had a job. A lot of us are very unemployable, and probably our resume has been a little bit better since we've been sober. But did anyone ever, I've had bosses that said, you have so much potential, you got to go. That's it. You have potential, is what they told me. And that was, 2 days on the job. Um, Anything you want to comment on that, Howard? Discuss with friends and employers?
Well, it's interesting what you picked out, and I don't know if I ever looked at it that way. If we break this down, it says it brings misunderstanding, fierce resentment. Fierce resentment brings harm. You just pointed that out. Financial insecurity, that brings fears. Disgusted friends and employers, warped lives of blameless children and sad parents, that brings angers.
Right.
Never realize that behind each one of those things is one of the basic problems that we deal with in our resentment list: angers, fears, harms brought on to others. And this whole section, this little part of this paragraph, to me, explains why alcoholism is the only disease that also sickens the family around us. And if you want evidence of that, read the paragraph again.
So, I mean, you look at that one sentence after the warped lives of blameless children. Now, here's the thing.
Ouch.
Are you the product of an alcoholic, or were you the product of an alcoholic home? Were you one of the blameless children? And, and you said, I'll never do that to my kids. I remember this one girl, when you get a bunch of people doing speed together and stuff, parents disappear for quite a while. And this one kid was like, I'll never do that to my kids. And now he's trying to get here, you know, and when they're to our children, and I will never treat my children like that. I will never do that in front of my kids. I will never leave my kids, hours. And then we do the same thing to our kids. That's because the obsession. It's not like we didn't love them. But what disgusts me when alcoholics, act like they're the innocent victims. Our children were the innocent victims. And some of us harmed our kids so bad, it takes years for them to accept an amends. I had one guy, he just passed away of cancer, but he kept calling me up and said, my daughter will never accept my amends. Never. And she kept saying no. And I said, keep trying, keep trying. Next, a year later, he's walking her down the aisle. So, but they're the innocent victims, and some never even make amends to their kid, which makes me sick.
Mm.
It makes me sad for them, not just the kid, but for the guy sitting in the room, because you're not experiencing this stuff. So the blameless children again is more indication that we have some harms. We have some stuff we need to fix. That's why I just said that sobriety is just a byproduct of spirituality. Doing 4 through 9, the solution is going to get me past all this stuff that, because we get here. I didn't join Alcoholics Anonymous because my emotions were out of whack. I joined Alcoholics Anonymous as an alcoholic. My friends did it best. AA should be called Emotions Anonymous. If those who do the steps should be called Emotions Anonymous, because that's what we were really looking at, our emotions, so we can overcome this obsession. And then it said sad wives. Again, third, fourth, how many chances did this get? I watch wives love their husbands and have no choice but to leave. On the flip side, I see relationships reassemble through years of divorce. You know, um, after but they're making amends. The recovered alcoholic and his wife become friends, and that all of a sudden their life's normal. Amazing stuff. I love hearing, the wives saying, that there's not this person's not the same person, or vice versa. And then it says parents. I'll never forget that look of disappointment on my mom's face or my dad's face. My mom would get mad. My dad would just give me that. He was an old school John Wayne guy.
Yeah.
He just gave me it was all in his eyes. You know, like I remember, but then with my mom, a lot of us did here for people we love. I robbed them of their emotional security, and what I mean is when I made amends to my mom, I asked her how I can make it right. And her response was, I'm just glad I'm not getting calls anymore in the middle of the night, especially that you're going to be scraped off the sidewalk somewhere. And that's why I realized I robbed her for years of emotional security. So who are the innocent victims here? And how many, chances did parents give us? And one of the greatest, gifts is the opportunity again to make amends. And it says anyone, yes, we could increase the list, but we'll explain more later. But, you know, we do that by doing step 4. Howard, do you want to comment on that stuff still? Or?
No, I'll go on to the next step.
So one thing I want to mention is this paragraph is one of the first paragraphs that really, for me, kind of ripped my spine out and showed it to me. It opened my eyes is a better word. Sir, when I realized I had some rebuilding to do, but describe the set of addiction that's rarely talked about in meetings. People rather talk about DUIs and having alcoholic seizures and so forth than talk about the pain they cause other people. And this is, open my eyes to the destruction I caused.
So you think you're only harming yourself?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
One thing I want to do really quick is to give you a good example of this is it says, and engulfs all lives except the sufferer. So I'm going to show you guys something really quick. And this is called the circles of engulfment, right? So the circle of engulfment, Steve is me, of course, and Miss X was a girlfriend I had. And um, you know, and what happened is me and her had a domestic situation. And in front of well, it was me that was doing it. And I never wasn't something I'm proud of her. I mean, made amends for it and everything, but it's like the problem was I did it and her friends who tried to break it up and they witnessed it. So friends number one, friend number two. Now I fought them and I've harmed them. They witnessed it. And she, she runs inside and calls oh, there's friends who witnessed it. I'm sorry. There's more people that witnessed it that were there. So this is called witness number one and witness number two. Then she calls her parents, right? And and then, and oh yeah, the cops showed up and I started, trying to talk my way out of it and everything like that. And I'm drunk and, all of a sudden I'm fighting four cops. Oh, she called my parents too. Um, and I'm fighting four cops. There's 14 people in this circle all of a sudden that I harmed. It engulfs all lives it has to suffer. All lives. See how quickly that happened? I mean, that happened in a fraction of a second. That's another indication that we need to do some serious inventory work. Like another quick example would be when I was 23, I had this really pretty girl and she had some money, and that's the only reason I really wanted to be around her. And um, so I said, you know what, I'm gonna keep her around. I'll say I'm gonna marry her. And right before the wedding was gonna happen, like a month, I canceled it all. Well, you know, everything was purchased for this thing. Everything went bought, and did I care? You know, I didn't care about my fiance's wife, mom, who was bipolar, who had a breakdown over it. Her dad was a big guy that pulled a gun on me because of it. But you see what I'm saying? The list goes on. And people say, there's no harm inventory in here. Why, and I say, so maybe you didn't do that with your sponsor. That's fine. It's not a rule, but um, I think it's clear indication in this book that there should be a harm inventory. And the question is, why wouldn't you do it, or how could you not? If you want to be healed, you need to look at this stuff. It's deep stuff. And for me to achieve freedom, I need to get past guilt. And how do we overcome the guilt? By doing 4 through 9, especially making amends. In other words, we take action. Howard, you want to comment on any of that?
Well, I'll comment by reading the next two lines because that sums it all up and that wraps it up with a neat little bow. We hope this volume will inform and comfort those who are or may be affected. There are many. Good night, nurse. We'll see you next week.
And it doesn't say a few there, does it? Yeah, there's nothing in that paragraph that's that the weekend warrior member of AA will relate with, the meeting maker guy that doesn't have the allergy. But we'll get to that later. I'm going to turn off not leave the meeting, stop the recording. Sorry.